Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Handmade Hero. This is the show where we code a complete game live on stream on Twitch. No engines, no libraries. We do everything from the very basic rendering code in a game all the way up to the sort of high-level AI code and everything in between. And right now, we are doing something kind of whimsical, if I may say so myself, which is we are making our own general purpose allocator. And I guess more to the point, we made one yesterday, but we did not have time to really run it or debug it, so we kind of just put it in place and haven't really gotten it, we haven't even verified that it's even working. And it is also certainly not efficient at what it does in any way. And so today, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at that general purpose allocator and debugging it, so getting it to a working state, and then B, maybe thinking about it, looking at it a little bit, and seeing if there's maybe some things we might want to do to make it more efficient at what it does, because, well, I guess we haven't talked about it yet, but I'll talk a little bit on the Blackboard later today after we do the debugging part, about, what are the things about this general purpose allocator as we have written it that aren't so great, right? All right. So since we're coding, I would like to remind everyone who has pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org if they would like to follow along. Today is day 161, so you want to unzip day 160's source code into a directory, and that will allow you to start exactly where I am starting right now. So if I go ahead and go into the code base, you will remember that it sort of, we did run it briefly yesterday, and it sort of worked, but it sort of didn't. Like, I felt like there, it was not immediately crashing or anything like this, but it definitely got into an interesting state there. You can see that kind of flickering, which suggests to me that, that could be theoretically correct, depending on the exact parameters of the system, but it seems unlikely. So I suspect that indicates that it is unable to, actually release memory when it needs to or something like this. And so my assumption is that there's at least one bug in there. That's my assumption. Now, I don't know for sure, but that's my assumption. But it's not a catastrophic bug in terms of crashing, but there is something bad going on is my feeling. That's just my gut instinct based on what that pattern was. Because yes, we are running in a restricted memory scenario, so obviously we could crank the memory that it was allowed to use up and that blinking would go away, but that may just be masking an actual problem. So I would rather take this opportunity to actually go verify what's going on. I assume we'll find something happening incorrectly, and when we fix it, the blinking will become significantly less severe. That is my assumption, but I, of course, could be wrong. All right, so I decided that I liked this strategy where we were going to write our own general purpose allocator. I was feeling good about it yesterday. So what I'm going to do before anything else, excuse me, is I'm also going to start pulling this stuff out here. Like evict assets as necessary is not really going to be a thing anymore, right? And total memory used versus target memory used is not really necessary anymore either. Because now we just know how much memory we have, because we just have memory blocks. And when we're out of those blocks, we know we need to free something, right? That's the stuff that's going on here. So I'm going to start by just simplifying things down a little bit. I want to get rid of some of this code because it doesn't need to be there. It's just going to confuse us if it's sitting around, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say target memory used and total memory used. I think those can just go ahead and go away, right? Total memory used. And yeah, I'll just go ahead in here and say get rid of that, get rid of that. In fact, I'll just let the compiler tell me where that's happening. Evict assets as necessary is no longer a thing at all. Don't have these anymore, right? So I think that's good. Okay. So now that we've gotten rid of those, let's go back and start focusing on the actual stuff that we need to do here. So we've got release asset memory. We're going to say that now release asset memory does this. Oh, well, there's our problem right there. We just weren't actually done. There. We don't actually remerge our memory blocks together. So that would do it right there. So maybe we don't have a bug. Maybe we just weren't done yet. Totally theoretically possible. So let's take a look down here, right? We're going to get rid of this. There we go. Okay. So that's all good, and evict asset now is something that we could actually just put directly in line. We don't actually need a call for evicting assets because there's only one place that evicting assets could actually happen. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop that directly into here, right? So evict asset's going to be this, right? I think that might even just compile as it is. Let's take a look here. Yep. So evict asset now is just a thing. And release asset memory, I guess that's only one place where that happens as well. Now, I don't know if if releasing the asset memory is actually, and I think we'll be okay with this. So I think I'm going to also go ahead and drop that in here. So we're really just talking about making this thing almost be like just this one little nice, tiny little function that's going to do the entire memory stuff, and we can just look at it in one piece, and it should be relatively easy to understand, and I think that'll be good. So let's take a look here. We've got the asset block. We want to change the flags on the asset block, and so where is that memory coming from? That memory is coming from this asset arrow header, right? So we're basically talking about this, I guess? Wait. We're calling that... How is that asset header? Let me think about this for a second. So I guess that's true, because the first thing in the asset is the header. So that would actually be correct, I guess. You move it back from the header, off you go. So that's all good. So let's take a look and see if that all still works. And by works, I mean it still has the flashing, obviously, right? But that's fine. Okay, so I would suggest that possibly our flashing is actually just due to the fact that we no longer recombine our memory blocks, which means eventually all the memory blocks will end up being very small and they'll never be able to recombine, and so large assets won't be able to be loaded or things like this. Although it doesn't seem like that would produce the effect we're seeing, so maybe that really doesn't have much to do with it. But I feel like before we start debugging anything, to say the least, we should actually finish implementing it, because it's going to be pretty hard to debug the thing if it's actually not working the way it's supposed to work, because we haven't actually implemented the thing that it's actually supposed to do. Okay. So when we free the asset block, right, now we can actually do this thing that I was saying before where we don't have to hunt anymore for the block. So the block can actually come up here. We can do if block, and then we come down here and we actually create this we actually free up the block. Now that block is the one that we would be using or checking to see if that block actually was used. Because remember I said yesterday, I was like, well, we don't really need to find the block more than once. We can just say, can you find any block for this? And if you can't find a block for this, right, then we're going to go free something so that we can try to make room. When we free that something, the only block that could now possibly hold our thing, because we looked at all the blocks before and found nothing. So the only block that could now be big enough to hold the thing that we want to put in there is the one that we operated on, because that's the only one that could have expanded, right? So when we free it, we do this, we say, okay, we mark that as used. And now what we need to do is we need to look at the blocks on either side of it to see whether those blocks could be merged into this block, right? So what we need to do is say, all right, let's look at the block before us, and if the block before us works, then we'll merge, and then we'll look at the block behind us, and if the block the block after us, and if that works, we'll merge. So what we want to do is like merge if possible, right? We want to do something like this, where we say, all right, merge if possible, the assets, passing that just so it knows what the sentinel is, right? I want to merge if possible the blocks previous and this block, right? And then I'm going to expect that to return to me, you know, whatever it ended up doing. So either return this block, the block that's the sort of the pivot block, and you know what? No, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna have it return. Whether it merged or not, right? So if it didn't merge, block is still correct. If it did merge, then the block previous is actually going to be the one, because that's the start. That's at the head, right? So we'd do this, right? And then after that's done, we would do the exact same thing with block next, right? So we'd say merge block and block next. And in this case, we don't actually care if the merge succeeded, because if the merge succeeded, if the merge didn't succeed, then block is still the block we're looking at. If the merge did succeed, then block has just grown to encompass the next one. And so either way, it's fine, right? So now all we need to do is implement merge if possible. And basically merge if possible will return whether or not it was able to merge, and if it can merge, it'll do that merge. So we have these blocks, right? These asset memory blocks. And so we'll basically say we have asset memory block first and asset memory block second, I think is how I'll name them. And the reason I'm naming that way is because there is an implication here that says, like, we're basically saying they have to be contiguous. So first comes first and second comes second in memory space. So we're going to have to look to make sure that those in fact do line up, right? Now we know that they always will actually, so I suppose that's something we could even assert on. But basically what we need to check is if first is not equal to memory sentinel, right? We need to make sure that none of these are the sentinel, because you can't merge with the sentinel. It's a fake a thing in the list, right? And second is not equal to assets memory sentinel, right? So assuming that that these are actual legitimate blocks that could, in theory, merge, right? So neither of them is a sentinel, they're actual blocks. Then what we need to do is we need to see if they're both free, right? So we need to take a look at the flags. We need to say if first flags and asset memory used, right? I guess we'd say that. If not that, and not the second asset memory used. So if neither one is used, then we could merge them, right? I guess we'll put a result up here, false. Return false. So, and then we'll set the result to true if we can merge them, right? So if the first and second blocks are both not used, then we need to check if they are contiguous. Now, if we only had one big block of memory, they would always be contiguous and we just could merge them. But remember, we want to support, in case of 32-bit windows, the possibility that the asset system has been given multiple disparate chunks of memory to manage that may not be contiguous in address space, in virtual address space. So we don't want to assume that these two blocks of memory actually have adjacency. So we want to check to make sure that they are actually, that the sizes actually line up, right? So what we want to do is say, okay, if we were to take we want to basically compute where the second block would be, expected second kind of thing, right? We want to compute where that would be and see whether it ends up equaling the actual second block, right? We want to do something like this, right? So see if the two pointers actually line up. So where would we expect the second block to be if it actually followed the first block, right? Well, if we take the first block and we add the size of the asset memory block header, right? And then we add the size that of the actual, that memory block actually contains, right? Then that should get us to the very next position that could actually be, where the header for the second block should actually be, right? And so if that occurs, we would then check, whether that coincides. If it does coincide, then we know that we can merge these blocks together. And so what we want to do there is we want to remove that. Oops, it's not good. We want to remove. Do we even ever have that? I'm trying to think. We want to remove the memory header. Let's see. Remove asset header from list. We want to do this, right? Where does that get called anywhere? That's the wrong one. That's not what I want. We've got two linked lists. I want the asset memory block. Does insert block have a... It doesn't. So we don't have the concept of removing a block at the moment. We only have the concept of inserting it, right? Yeah, that looks like the case. So if that's the case, we have to actually do it ourselves, right? So we have to actually go in here, and in merge as possible, we have to remove the second one. So the next previous is going to be pointing to the previous, right? And the previous next is going to be pointing to the next. So we just have to remove it from the list, so it's out of there. And now we just take its size. We just obliterate, like basically just say, you know what? You're done. Sorry, friend. And our size is now going to be, encompassing you as well, right? So it's basically the size of a header, which is we're eating up the asset memory block header, and then we're eating up the total size of the second block, right? And at that point, the result is true, meaning we did merge the two, and that's it, right? That's all we really need to do. And then we're all good. And now we just have to actually, well, we have to actually debug things. That's a little bit odd. Ah, right. So there is one other thing we need to do there. So in this case, we are assuming that after the merge, we have a particular block that we need to check. We need to actually check to see if the block, yeah, we have to actually check to see if this is true now, because it might not be true, right? It might not be true at all. So really what we want to do is say if there's a block and the size would fit this thing, right? So if there's a block and the size would fit this thing, it's no longer an assertion, it's a check. Because after the merge, it still might not be big enough. Like the thing we free may not actually fit the thing that we're trying to fit, right? So we still have to do that. Yeah, so let's try that again. So yeah, I mean, it's a little early to declare victory, but I feel like our general purpose allocator is now general purposely allocating. And it's using a very constrained amount of memory, and it's just paging in the assets as necessary, and that's why we're getting some blinking here. We're not even giving it enough memory to really keep any of these things. But yeah. That's it. I mean, it's sound is streaming properly. All the bitmaps are on, you know, no problems. It's only using that fixed memory block, right? Because we never give it any more memory. Not bad, right, guys? I mean, that's pretty good. So let's take a look here. If we go into oh, you know what? Somebody mentioned this on the forums the other day. When I was doing a search and replace, we never deleted, we pushed the asset counter. When we deleted the slot array, we did a search and replace that ended up, this used to be asset slots, right? And we didn't need it. So I've been meaning to remove that. That's on my little list of things here. There's also another one that Martin's pointed out that I should take care of. It's on my list, but we probably don't need to do it right now. So yeah, so if you know, just to recap, now what we do is this one push size here. That's it. The asset system will never use any more memory other than for loading assets other than this, whatever this size is, right? That's it. So the whole game would run just fine now, actually. It might just be very blinky because we're just not giving it hardly any memory. But even as it is right now, it would run just fine because it'll never use any more than exactly what we just gave it. It'll never use more than 4 megabytes to keep its asset pages in. So that's pretty sweet. I feel like that's kind of awesome, right? That seems pretty darn great to me. Now, the thing that I don't know, right, and this is, I guess, what I was going to say about things that we might want to, you know, how are we going to, what are the problems with this, I guess, basically, is one question, right? And the thing that I wanted to mention on the blackboard is if I'm just going to summarize sort of the way that our scheme is working at the moment, I'm going to kind of give you what the basic idea is, and then I'm going to explain why, you know, maybe that's not quite the best possible situation, right? So what's going on currently is we have a, you know, series of blocks of memory, and these things get filled up, right, in various ways. Who knows how? Not super important. But as these things get filled up, we end up in a situation where each individual, each individual portion here is part of a linked list, right? So there's like a linked list running through this entire thing, right? So the problem that I foresee, and the reason why I'd say that this is not a particularly good general purpose allocator at this point, right, is not because there's really all that much of a problem with how it is allocating. Because I think we probably will be able to give the asset system enough memory that it might not be a huge deal, the fact that it's not thinking about fragmentation in particularly smart ways or anything. I don't know that that's actually going to be a problem. Maybe it would be, maybe it wouldn't be, hard to say. The thing that I more foresee being a problem is the length of this linked list, right? So what I imagine happening here is that this linked list is potentially going to get very large, right? So let's say we have, 4,000 assets loaded. Well, that could be as many as 8,000 links in the linked list, right? So that means that every time we go to allocate some additional memory, like when we go to load an asset, which we're going to do a few times a frame, right? We're going to load, we're going to issue loads for 5, 6 assets a frame, maybe more, right? It's potentially having to loop over something on the order of thousands of links, right? In order to find where it's going to put this thing. And that just doesn't seem like maybe it's going to hold up, right? And so what we probably would need to do is introduce a faster search model on top of this thing. The doubly linked list is great for merging, right? Because the merging it can do, you saw how quick the merge happened, right? The merge can just do it in one fell swoop. If I free that, if I free this block, it just looks at this block and merges if necessary, and it's done. So the merge is just instant, right? It's not a problem at all. Never going to be a problem. But what is not instant is that it's this code right here. This is the problem, right? And so what we would want to do if we were going to improve this memory allocator, which maybe we don't want to do now, because maybe that's premature. Maybe what we want to do is get to the point where we've got 8,000 allocations, see that it is slow, gather some metrics on it, and improve it then, which is, I think, probably what I will argue for, because optimizing it now is kind of data-free. But what I foresee happening is we get to that point and this function starts to show up on the profile, right? When we're like, why is the game slow? Suddenly find block for size becomes a thing that we're seeing, right? 1% of the time, 5% of the time, 10% of the time, 20% of the time, it starts to creep up as we start saying, hey, let's run the game with a 4 gigabyte footprint and let it load a ton of assets in there and blah, blah, right? That's what I foresee the problem being. And so I think, if I may, I think we're going to have a thing that's here, which is like this probably will need to be accelerated in the future as the asset count, resident asset count, grows. And so, yeah. Are we going to see that now? Absolutely not, because you have to remember the number of assets we have in the game right now is like 30 or something, right? So the chances that we're ever going to see a meaningful performance hit from somebody having to iterate over 60 links or something like this is, right, totally not going to happen. So, yeah, we don't really have any way of really knowing what kind of impact this is going to have on our performance at this point. But down the line, that is just something to be aware of. So I would say, yeah, do we want to do that now? Probably not. It seems a little bit premature. So I would say maybe let's look at some other things, a couple other things first. And we could even just move on from assets at this point into debug code probably or something like that. Because honestly, like that went a lot faster than I thought it was going to go to do the sort of minimal stupid general purpose allocator. It was like 2 days or something. I don't even know. It was very, very short. And so I guess general purpose allocators just aren't that hard if you don't optimize them, is the lesson we've learned. So yeah, so I would say maybe we'll push that to the time when it actually shows up on the profile so that we can do intelligent optimization instead of, speculative optimization, which is usually not a very good idea because then you tend to optimize for stuff that is not the truth. You're not optimizing for the case that you actually care about. And so maybe we'll just save the couple days of work that we may have done on that optimization, bank those, and re-hit those again in 6-7 months when we're running around the game and noticing on a profile that that's causing us a problem, right? In the meantime, I did want to point out something that Martin's mentioned on the forums that's true, something that's not great, which is actually, I had written this code thinking that things were going to work one way, but in truth, they don't actually work that way. And so we do have a thing we want to check here. And that is that while our error system is pretty good in that you can just use this platform no file errors thing to handle this situation with the file handle, we do have a slight problem, which is that it's possible for open next file to fail completely because it's a allocation-based thing. So the platform layer can't actually guarantee that you actually get a handle back, right? Because if you remember how this worked, if you take a look at open next file, it needs to do a virtual alloc here, right? It needs to do a virtual alloc to even get that file handle back. And unfortunately, that means that the no errors thing isn't gonna fly, right? Because this may be null, and then none of this stuff would work, right? So what I'd like to do is change the behavior of this slightly to make it conform to what I wanted it to do, which I did not do a very good job of doing this time. And that is that I would prefer to actually go to a structure that looks more like this, right? Where we're actually going to get something a little bit different. Okay. And this is how I think I typed it in originally. But yeah. So what I'd like to do here is say that we're going to store a void pointer out to the platform-specific portion. And the reason I'm going to do that is because now I can force the important part, which is the error check and the file count, which are actually always used in the outer part of the code. I force those to always actually exist and be correct. And this can be null, but I know that the other part can never be wrong, right? And so what I do then is instead of everywhere using a file handle pointer, I actually just use a file handle stored directly. Does that make sense? And so now when we do these, we know that we'll always have that one part of it, and we never have to worry about things going sour separately. So if I go in here and change how that's going, just change these to handles so that we're actually passing them kind of by value rather than by a pointer to what they are. That takes care of things for me because now you can always have this sort of short circuit data at the top that you know will always be there, and you don't have to worry about what happened allocation-wise. So I'm going to go ahead and go through, let the compiler kind of guide me, kind of guide me through the process of making this work, right? So yeah, actually, now that I think about it, these guys still actually want to be pointers, if that makes sense. It's just the return part that doesn't do it, right? Because I still want to use the same error code, right? If that makes sense. So I still want get all files of type n to take a pointer. I still want open next file to take a pointer. I still want these guys all to take pointers. Yeah. So that's all good. So the only difference is here, right? This guy probably takes a non-pointer. I don't know. We could still make him take a pointer if we wanted to, I suppose. Let's take a look. All right. So get file handle 4. This again is just going to return the address of the file handle in question. Let's see here, file count. When we get the file group back, we're actually just looking at the actual thing there, so that's fine. Let's see here. File handle platform open next file. File group, we now have to pass the address of. File handle again is address of. And same here. Address of, address of. There we go. And trying to see if there's anything else interesting there. Platform file error. I don't actually know why that's... Do we know why that's an actual call? I don't know that I know why that's a call. Like, have we thought about why platform file error is a call? Because it seems like platform file error could just be like a macro, like platform no file errors is, right? I guess it's not worth really belaboring at this point, but it's just something that's a little odd, to say the least. Anyway. All right, so open next file. Open next file is supposed to return a actual file handle, so that's supposed to be that way. Let's take a look here. File point n, that's going to take the address of a file group. And then platform no file handles, sorry, no file errors is also going to take an address of, and address of. Okay. Good. So I think that's all we need to do there, but now in here we actually have to start to think about what's going to happen when this thing gets passed in. So all of these functions have to be changed, right? So now these things go away, right? And we're just left with the actual platform portion, if that makes sense. And so now we can go through and actually do this stuff correctly. So we allocate one of these guys, and when we are actually going to return this, we're going to return a platform file group, which is like the result of this thing, right? And so our Win32 file group is just the platform portion of that, like so, right? And then when we return that, we just go ahead and say return result. So that's really it. We're just trying to kind of changing things around a little bit here. And again, like now we don't store those as part of the same thing. We're kind of storing them separately, so we can just kind of go ahead and do that, right? So let's take a look there. Oops, that skipped over them. So that looks like that's all cleaned up now, which is good. So then what we want to do is do the same thing here. So when we grab this guy, the Win32 file group, now we're going to be again taking that platform handle part of the file group structure and casting that. So that keeps going. Again, nothing particularly odd happening there. Same thing would happen here. And now we've got a thing where a platform file handle is actually the result. So here we've got the platform version, Win32 platform file handle, and this is Win32 handle, and that's going to be sort of specific. And I guess these don't really need to be called Win32 handle anymore, because now we've got Win32 handle, Win32 handle. Always fun. But yeah. Let's see here. Win32 file group, find handle. That's all fine. File group, find handle, results, no errors. Keep looking. So there we go. All right. And so when we do this here, our result, the platform part, again, is just this Win32 handle that we've created. And now in here, excuse me, all we have to do is just take a look at what comes in and, again, switch to using that platform part rather than using sort of the other piece there. So, yep, those are arrows, not dots. Let's see here, Win32 handle, left of platform. So platform file handle result should have been an actual struct. There we go. And Win32 handle, Win32 handle. There we go. Read data from file. That's also supposed to be an arrow. Really wanted that to be a dot, apparently. And win32 file error, this would just be on the source directly, right? And it's already a pointer, so that does not need to be repointered. All right, so let's see if I've introduced any heinous bugs here. Looks like everything's fine. And so again, the only real thing I wanted to do there was just make it so that it was easier on the outside code to handle the error situations where it would just be like, okay, guys, you know, when we do read data from file and all that, and open next file and that stuff, it can all cascade as errors on the file handle, and we don't have to keep checking the file handle for null and whether there were errors on it. I just wanted one error code. And so that's all good. So another thing that I wanted to point out, because people were very hot and bothered about this on the forums, you know, I don't want to say I don't care about it, but the truth is I really don't care about it. But, you know, one of the things I like to do is, even if I don't care about something, if you care about something, I'm happy to show how to do it. So what people were worried about is they were worried that, I guess they weren't worried that this code had a problem, because there really isn't any reason this code would have a problem, but they were worried that, like, if people wanted to use code like this in a Unicode setting, that it would be a problem, or something like this. I don't know. People get very uptight about Unicode, and that's fine, but it's not really something I care about ever. So what I would say about this is we are using the A versions of the calls in Windows, right? Which means we're passing ANSI strings. Now, we are only using it to enumerate over the files in the directory that we are in, and those files are files we created. They're our asset files. So we know that they're never going to have Unicode in them because I'm never going to type a Unicode file name into the asset files. Pretty much, period. But if you had wanted to load asset files that had Unicode in them, this would not work. And the reason that it would not work is because when you call find first file with A as the, as the suffix, it's not going to be able to return you Unicode file names because the Win32 find data A structure doesn't take Unicode file names, right? That's just not, it doesn't do that. So if you wanted to be able to load data out of Unicode file names, you would need to switch to using W and A, which I will go ahead and do in a second here. But I want to point out that that cascades down one level as well, and create file also has to be A, and find next file also has to be A, right? So this part of the code also needs to switch to using W's, not A's. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about this, and I kind of want to point this out because this is intentional and was intentional, but I don't think I ever mentioned it. You will note that I never exposed the file names to the game code. Okay? I never exposed the file names to the game code. That was a very deliberate decision. And the reason that I made that decision was because of exactly this thing. I don't know what operating systems this is going to run on. I don't know what crazy conventions they're going to have. I don't know if they're going to use UTF-8 or UTF-16 or UTF-32 or God knows what other kind of crazy character encoding that a bunch of people in some community somewhere make up. I don't know what their path separator is. I don't know anything about it. I don't even know if I can iterate over directories and put path names into file names or not, right? Anything could go, anything goes down there at the bottom. And so what a lot of people do when they architect this is they pass those file names back through. They let that stuff leak out into the game layer, and that's a really bad idea. The reason it's a really bad idea is because it pushes this complexity of knowledge up into the game that the game didn't care about. The game just needs to know asset files, save game files. It doesn't care what they're called, right? It never, ever, ever needs to know that information, right? So that is why I architected it so that the API was blind to the file names. It just knows that a certain number of files are going to come back, and when it iterates over those files, it just asks for them by index. It says, I want, I'm getting the first file. Oh, it did not even index. It just says, give me the next one, right? And it doesn't care what it's called. So that is what we want to do. I think that's a good decision. And it allows us to make this change painlessly. No code upstream will have to change because of our decision to switch to Unicode down here, so that people can be less upset about themselves in their life. Okay. So let's start. First of all, let's just change all the A's to W's. So we'll just start by forcing the compiler to start complaining at us about all the things that aren't going to work right when we change these things to W's, right? So everything's a W now. Everything is a W. You just in through the whole thing, right? So we got create file W, find next file W. All those guys up there were W's, so I think we're good. What about in here? There's nobody should be doing anything else. I think AWYs, kind of like the root beer, up in here. All right. So now if I compile, I should get some complaints about the fact that the strings that we are passing into these functions are not the correct kind of string, and you can see that here. So find first file W, it's taking that wildcard parameter. That wildcard parameter is not UTF-16, it's a char, and that's a complaint, right? Find first file W, again down here, same wildcard to reinitiate the search, not the correct string type. Create file W, the file name, not the correct file, not the correct type, right? Again, and find next file W, not taking the correct handle. Oh, you know what? That's because we didn't do. There's one more we did not do. Where is it? Where is it? Right there. Right. Now we should get it. So there's our two find firsts are wrong. This one's wrong because it's trying to pull it out of something that doesn't actually that's going to be a wide char now, and the same is here for the create file, right? Okay. So we got to start using Unicode strings. How do we start using Unicode strings? Well, Visual C++, whatever, makes it easy to do UTF-16 because, hey, guess what? Windows is UTF-16 all over the place, so the Microsoft needs to support that cleanly and all this other nonsense. So, for example, what I can do is I can change from using a char to using what's called the wchar-t, right? And what that is that's just a way of saying UTF-16 character, right? And inside Windows. So let's see here if I've got a reference for it, right? Yeah, this is not a particularly good reference. I kind of want the MSDN version of this. There we go. So, right, this is a way of basically just saying I want a 16-bit character type. And there really isn't anything to it other than that's the name that they tend to give to these things. So that, when you're trying to interoperate with their code that uses these wide characters, this is what it considers a 16-bit character type, right? So I would have to change these to all pointing to these 16-bit character types. And then this, unfortunately, won't work anymore, right? So if I go in here, oh, I guess this one I can actually leave that, right? If I go in here, and I try to initialize my wildcard, right, to look like this, where it's star dot, right? I want to initialize it to that. This C, when it sees this, it will always turn this into a char string, because that's what C is defined to do. So what we want to do is tell it to turn into a wide character string, so that each of these, instead of this becoming a string that's 3 bytes long, the asterisk character, the dot character, and the null character, what we actually want to do is turn it into a string that's 6 bytes long. 2 bytes for the asterisk, 2 bytes for the dot, and 2 bytes for the null. Actually, I don't know how they do that. I assume they use 2 bytes for the null. I don't actually know. I don't hardly ever use UTF-16. So anyway, whatever they didn't do for the null, probably 2. Right? It would have to be because it's wchar-t. So yeah, 2 bytes for the null. So it's 6 bytes, right? So if we do this, we need some way of telling it, hey, make each character 2 bytes. We could convert it ourselves. But probably easier is to just let C do it because like MSVC's compiler allows you to prepend an L to the string and that says please make it a wide char. And so now you can see we don't have that problem anymore. This just kind of works, right? Now, what's interesting is you'll notice we didn't get any compile errors here. Why is that? Well, it's because actually we can just take our chars and stuff them into the wildcard, and that actually works. The reason that works is because the UTF-16 spec actually happens to line up with basic ANSI down in the bottom, right? So when you're just talking about ANSI characters, like ASCII characters, that are just like A through Z and some punctuation, right? Which is all our extensions are. The wide character version is just 16 bytes where the bottom 8 bits are the ASCII version and the top 8 bits are 0. So this actually works, believe it or not. So we don't actually have to change the loop. It probably is just fine. So yeah, that'll work fine. All of this code would now work fine because we're passing a wildcard that's properly formatted. What will not work fine is us doing this, where we're pulling a file name out of the find data struct, which is not actually a char star. But again, this is not particularly tricky because if you take a look at Win32 find data, you can see actually that in here, this thing is specified as a tchar, right? And what a tchar actually is that that's its way of saying, hey, whichever way you use it, if you use the A version, it's going to be a char. If you use the W version, it's going to be a wchar, right? So we can actually just say, oh yeah, that's now going to be a wchar-t, which means that we can then pass that to create file W, and it's going to be fine, right? So that should actually probably do it in terms of Unicode, as far as I know. But oh well, or not. Let's maybe not. Oh, yeah, maybe not. This, of course, no longer works because we have to actually use half of the size of the thing. So size of is not actually correct anymore. We could make this a little bit cleaner if we wanted to by actually saying array count, right? Because that'll work no matter what size that thing is, if that makes sense. But that's basically it. It's not, it's not rocket science. But now you can load Unicode named files for your asset files if that's the kind of thing that makes you happy. And like I said, if you've kept your API kind of relatively clean in this respect, the nice part is you can make a change like this and it doesn't really change anyone upstream, right? Nobody cares because it's only ever passing into you just an extension, and that extension can be simple, right? If we wanted to make it, we could go even one more step, right? So the extension thing assumes that whatever the notion of an extension makes sense on all platforms, and maybe that's not true, right? So if we wanted to go one step further, we could actually do it even crazier. We could actually do it where in the Handmade platform thing, we actually define the set of file types we actually know and care about, right? And, I don't know that we need to do that, but we could. And the way that that would, do it is instead of passing a char star type here, we would pass an enumerant. And we would have one enumerant per type of file, right? So we would have something that looked, like platform file type. And we'd have like platform file type asset file, right? Platform file type saved game file or something, right? And then we would always use those to refer to what we wanted to refer to, right? And that's not a bad idea. Right, that's a totally reasonable idea if we want to do that. I don't remember what our convention is for enums here. I don't think we actually define them as type defs, although we might want to, I suppose. Does that actually, I assume this works just fine. I haven't done this in a long time. Flashbacks to the granny days when I used to have to ship C headers for everything. So, we could do something like that, right? And maybe we should, right? Maybe we should do that because then we're even further removed from caring about how the operating system thinks about files, and we can support even wackier, more ridiculous situations, right? So if we did it that way, now when we come in here, In this particular piece of code, what we would do is we wouldn't do any of this. We would just do something like wcart wildcard, right? Equals star dot star or something like this, and then we would do a switch on the type, and we would have invalid default case. Oops, invalid default case. We would just have the cases here that enumerate whatever those guys are. So we'd say, okay, in the case of an asset file, in the case of a save game file, and then we'd say the wildcard for the asset file is star.hha. And again, that's got to be a wcart for the Unicode side of things. And the save file's like handmade hero save or something, right? Whatever. Then this code goes away, and everybody is presumably happy and excited about their life, except for the fact that I didn't capitalize that. Okay, and so that's really the only change we would have to make to support that. And you can see if I run it, we're back, to enumerating all the files correctly and all that other good stuff, right? So pretty good. Nothing particularly unusual there. Hopefully that makes a reasonable amount of sense. And then nobody is passing any file-related strings back and forth across the boundary. Everyone is always using some kind of a token that does not require understanding about what a file name is or how it works between the two layers of the code. I think that's it. I think that's really it. So I guess what I would say is, I don't really know what else to do. I feel like at the moment I would like to crank up our asset memory so we don't have so much flicker, so it doesn't have to constantly cycle the assets. I'd like it to be able to keep in memory all of the hero sprites, right? So maybe we'll give it just a little bit more memory for the time being, right? So instead of 4, maybe we'll give it 16 megabytes of memory so that it can have a little party. And so now we don't have any flicker anymore, and that's good, right? And again, we'll do some stuff with pre-caching a little later on, designed to sort of eliminate some of that flicker, hopefully, even in cases where the asset can't be, where the asset wasn't in memory already. We want to make it so we never see that flicker. There's a bunch of stuff we can do about that as well. But I think we're good. I think I'm pretty much ready to call it an episode. I don't think if there's any other things in here that, let's see. I think that's good. All right, so let's go to the Q&A. If you have any questions about what we did, please prefix them with Q:, so I can see them. Canuckles, first rays of Moscow sun bid you good evening. And good evening to you as well, sir. I humbly request to be granted 2 off-topic questions, maybe near the end. I am delighted to grant you those 2 questions, Canuckles. Fire away, and I will answer them when the on-topic questions dwindle. Blah238, I asked a similar question yesterday, but I guess it wasn't clear. Have you thought about how the asset system could work with third-party mods? Say someone wants to make a mod that adds new graphics, sounds, and/or game logic. How hard would it be to implement a mod loader, Steam Workshop support, etc.? Steam Workshop support's not something I'm super interested in, so I don't know that I would really spend any time looking at that. But what I would like to point out is mod loader is actually trivial. In fact, you don't have to do anything, because if you remember correctly, our asset files merge, right? So that adding new stuff is trivial. Like, let's say you wanted to draw more defined angles for all the heroes. That works just fine. The thing we have not done for mod support is this, right? Which is the ability to remove old assets, right? To basically say, don't use, don't use these sprites for the hero. Use this new set of sprites, right? That we haven't done. And that is something that I would consider doing. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to do it anytime soon, but it is something we could consider doing. Maybe we could, if you really feel very strongly about it, we could do it next week instead and just make sure that we've got all the bases covered. But yeah. Should there be a way to say if one of the hero assets are loaded, then they all should be loaded and are not evicted? So, like I said, we want to do some stuff with pre-caching, but I don't think we want to do like a non-eviction thing because our recently used should take care of that to some degree. And I think what we'd rather have is something that that does a pre-cache broadcast fairly frequently that says, if I use one direction of a guy, I'm probably going to use all the directions of a guy, right? And that would be more generic and not specific to the hero. So it would let you know, like, oh, if you're using this direction of the monster, you're probably going to use all the directions of the monster. So you probably want to get to work loading those in, right? So I think when we get to pre-caching, which will be kind of further down the road, I think we'll sort of get the hero part for free, if that makes sense. Because the hero's like the least interesting case. Because, yeah, we could just lock his assets down and be done. But I think the more interesting thing to do would be to work on like monsters and things, because those are the harder case, and I think the hero will just fall out of that. Might be off topic, but why exactly do you have typedef functions in the code? Kuber Caleb, you should go back and watch some of the episodes where we introduced that way back at the beginning. I explained it pretty thoroughly there. That's because those are function pointers that actually get entered into a table, right? A table that gets passed from the Win32 library, or the Win32 platform layer, to the DLL that's the game, and the game calls through them, right? So if you look in here, it's this global variable platform API thing. That's what everybody calls through to get those functions. So we have to typedef the functions so that we can actually put them in that structure. And you can see that happening right here. That platform API is a collection of function pointers. It's like a dispatch table. And so you can't really do that without typedefing them because, well, it would be just a lot of extraneous typing if you didn't. So Knuckles asked, did you see the Nostalgia Critic Wicker Man Cage in a Bear Suit review? I saw the link. I think you posted it on Twitter, or somebody did. But I have not actually had a chance to watch it yet. Maybe this weekend. Can we get a visual display of the loaded, unloaded chunks of asset memory when we do the debug stuff? Absolutely. In fact, that is one big thing that I absolutely want to do. So that should certainly happen. eChoice0. I would like to hear what your definition of enumeration is. What do you mean my definition of enumeration? Do you mean just like counting things? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't understand the question. Nichirer, good evening, Casey. Does Windows 10 change the coding, if you know? So to the best of my knowledge, nothing from Windows XP forwards changes the coding in the sense that you can still run the same code if you want to, but Windows 10 certainly introduces new APIs that you could use if you wanted to. And so, there's always new APIs, but the old APIs usually work still. On merge, if possible, when you pass the checks and do the merge, you add the size of the header plus the size but on the line before that you check that the size plus header matches, but the size should already include the header. Can you explain why that is? So the convention that was used here, and I'm not saying that there's anything particularly good or bad about it, so it's not like it's like a good convention, it's just what I happened to pick when I typed in the code, is that the size does not include the header. And the reason that I say that is because if you take a look at what insert block does, insert block sets the size of the block to be the size, the total size, minus however much the header took. So basically a block, the total amount of memory in a block is the header size plus the size that the block says it has. Right? So when we come in here, we want to do, where is the second block at? Well, it's going to be where the first block was, plus the size of the first block's header, plus the size the first block thinks it is. Right? And then we go ahead and say, okay, if that is, if the second block actually was there, then we go ahead and unlink the second block, and we say the first block now grows to include the entire second block. And the reason for that is because it's subsuming all of the second block in its entirety. This size, let me draw you a picture. Let me draw you a picture. You've got something that looks like this. Here's the header. Here's the size. Here's the header. Here's the size. Right? So our specification for a block is that the size should encompass everything after the header. Right? So how do we know where the second guy should be? Well, we have a pointer to the first guy. We add the size of the header, which gets us here. We add size, which gets us here. Right? We look to see if the second block is there. That is where we expect to be. If it is there, we know we can merge. How do we merge? Well, first we have to remove this from the linked list, which we do. Then we have to adjust this size to encompass what the actual block will look like later. And remember, what the block will look like now is this header plus this entire chunk of memory. So we have to include this header because we only account for one header when we say that the header is separate from the size. If I absorb this block, this header no longer exists. It's gone. So it's part of this entire thing. So we need to add this size plus the size of the header, which was this little chunk in here. And then yes, we don't count this header, but we do count this one because it's gone now. It became part of our actual usable block space. It's like literally disappearing. Does that make sense? What's the cause of the depth error you get on rendering? So we don't sort yet. That's still a to-do in our renderer. And so the assets, the textures just get rendered in whatever order they happen to go in. So it's like random, right? So once we sort, then we won't have that depth thing happening. Okay. Let's take a look at Canucle's off-topic questions. Canucles says, this is a long one. You know I'm the biggest fan of the series, but I suspect for complete newbies, the current way you construct the game makes little sense. Consider this, you know how to make a game, so you methodically cross over a checklist of components you know by heart, mostly, of course, designed with all the tools and tech in place, will be... I guess I can't read that because there's no Q colon in front of it. Let me see if I can get that. By heart, of course, design with all the tech in place will be... What would probably be easier and more graphic for larvas to grasp is to make a little functional game, title screen, game loop, game over, start over, and then iterate upon it. It's more visual, and having a little game that evolves every day, little by little, keeps the maker motivated as opposed to a pro that knows what the game should look like in the end. Okay, wait, there's more. So it's a toolbox versus a bad game. Good game approach as I see it. Did you weigh in different models? What ultimately set you on your current one? Sanity check on my yapping. Yeah, so I actually did think about that. And my feeling about that was actually that I wanted the series to basically have a breakpoint in it, which again I say is somewhere maybe around day 200, 250, when the engine work is done in terms of being done in a vacuum, and we're just doing the game from then on. And my thought was, anyone who didn't want to know about how the engine was made or didn't want to know how the engine was made yet would just come into the series there. Because that would basically be like what would happen if you started with Unity, right? It'd be like, okay, now we've got our own engine. So if all you're thinking about doing is powering up some existing engine and making game in it, well, now we're at that place, except our engine's better. I mean, what can I say? It just is. But anyway, point being, I did think about that, and my feeling is that that's something that I feel like people can join later. And I'm going to do an announcement at that time where I'm going to be like, okay, we finished our our engine work, and we're going to start making the game now. So anyone who was only interested in that part can come watch from here on out. And of course, one of the reasons I include the source code with the series is that means you also don't ever really have to do that part, because you could always just start with the source code from that day and have, you know, the ability to render sprites and the ability to play sounds and all these other things that maybe you're not prepared to go learn at that time. So that was my feeling. But the reason I didn't do that from the start is because that would have required me to like ship existing code, basically. Because if you don't know how to render a bitmap, you're never gonna be able to put sprites on the screen, right? And I did not want to ship code at the start. I wanted to start with nothing. That was very important to me. So that's why I decided to do it that way. Where's the second question? I don't see a second question, Canuckles. You said 2 questions you had, but I don't see the second one. Unless you're counting the previous question you asked about the nostalgia critic Wicker Man. Oh, you did. You labeled that 0. All right, so I guess those were both. Well, I have answered both questions. So let's see what else we got here. Did I ever play Freelancer? No, I did not play Freelancer. I think I may... No, I guess I don't have Freelancer. I have Privateer 2, which I tried to play. It was not good. I liked Privateer 1, but I was pretty young back then. I think I pretty much played anything in those days. I don't see any other questions. Have you seen Kung Pao? No. I did not, I don't think. Yeah, so are we all done? I don't see any more questions. I feel like that's it. Cuber Caleb, which version of Visual Studio are you using at work? I use 2012. I use the commercial version. Like I actually bought like Visual Studio 2012, and so that's the one I use. Colimian, will that point in time see a new intro trailer with an old motherboard being pulled from the attic, engine booting up, and Handmade Hero announcing completion of the engine, perhaps with a nice sign scroller and particle effects? I wouldn't say that, but there will be a new trailer to go along with that. It would not probably be as you describe it, but there would be another trailer, yes. It'd be the We Finished the Engine trailer. Breadth of hair. Is font rendering around the corner? Yes. I think we probably would have to start on font rendering probably next week, I'm guessing, because we're not going to get anywhere debug code-wise without a font. I mean, we could do some very limited debug visualizations with no font, but you kind of need a font. Plain flavored. How do you render without instantiating a brush object? Do you mean like a GDI brush object? I mean, the reason that we don't do that is because we're not rendering through GDI. We basically, the only thing we ask Windows to do for us is just put the bitmap that we make onto the screen. So we do all the rest of the rendering ourselves, so we don't need a brush object because GDI doesn't do any drawing for us. The only thing it does is curry our bitmap out to put it into the compositor so it'll show up as part of Windows' display composition. But so we don't need to instantiate any GDI objects other than the basic, like the ones necessary to send a bitmap to Windows. That's covered in the first day 3 or something of Handmade Hero, I think. I don't even remember, but very early on, right at the beginning of the series, I show how to do that part of it, and that's all we need GDI to do for us. So. Manic the Nobody, will you be going the easy way and using bitmap fonts, or you'll be implementing TrueType fonts? We definitely won't implement TrueType fonts. The primary reason we won't implement TrueType fonts is because there's actually no reason to implement TrueType fonts. Because if you think about it, our game art is bitmaps. So it would be a very odd decision to say we need to allow our fonts to be arbitrarily rescaled as vector art, but our regular art, that's what you're actually looking at in the game 99% of the time, can be bitmaps, right? It doesn't make any sense. If you were going to make something, if you made some kind of decision about needing high-res line art, you would first be worried about the assets in the game, not the fonts, because the fonts are not super relevant. The fonts don't even really have much need for that. So we'd definitely be rasterizing fonts to bitmaps and then just using the bitmaps directly, because there's literally no payoff for TTF in a game unless your game is really about text. Do you know anyone by the name of Andre Lamoth? I do not know personally someone by the name of Andre Lamoth, but I do know that there was a guy named Andre Lamoth a long time ago. He used to write these weird big thick books that were Secrets of the DirectX Programming Gurus or something, right? I've never read one of those books. I don't know what they're like. I just know that was his thing. Are you going to implement distance field font? Well, distance field font, so okay. I don't know if you want how in-depth you want me to go on that, but distance fields don't really work for fonts. Distance fields are very bad for fonts. The only thing that you can do for fonts if you want to go that route is you actually need to use a multi-distance field encoding, right? If you only do a distance field font, you will get a very, very ugly font. Really ugly. Not a font you ever want to see on a screen. The reason, and I can actually just tell you the reason while we're on the topic. So the reason is because your font will always be rounded. So for example, if this is the glyph, like the capital T glyph, what you will get with distance fields is all of the corner edges are rounded. So what you will actually get with a distance field font is this. Right? And so distance fields are actually awful for fonts. If you are trying to do the thing where you have a infinite resolution font encoded in a bitmap, what you actually need to do is you need to use an encoding that encodes a variable number of distance fields or functions, side functions, depending on how you want to do it, into a bitmap, and you have to actually, do those in a pixel shader after the fact, right? And so what you do is for this pixel, right? The problem is that this pixel in this font, right, can only record the distance, and it's trying to record the distance between two edges. So it loses the information that there were two edges that needed to meet here, right? And so what you actually need to do is you need to encode in this pixel the fact that there were two edges and have the pixel shader and those two together to produce the correct crisp edge. And you could do that. But you have to ask yourself whether you should just actually use bitmap fonts at a higher resolution instead, because there's, that's pretty costly compared to, just a bitmap. Is it worthwhile to try and make a game using only pure functions, i.e. no side effects? Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, that's not possible, really. Because how would you actually keep track of the fact that time was going forward? Right? I mean, at the risk of being overly silly, even if I could make it so that I had a thing called f of t, where f of t produced the frame for the game at time t, right? What sits here and knows to keep calling f of t with an increment, with a time increment? Right? Like, it cannot be purely functional because somebody has to remember the fact that t was increasing. Not to mention the fact that how is it going to account for input? Because if it's purely functional, you need f of t plus the input series at all t, right? From 0 to t. Because it has to re-simulate the game from the very beginning in order to figure out what this frame actually should look like. Because in a purely functional language, you have no storage, right? So you can't store the state of the world, because if you could, you have a side effect, which is whoever updated that. So you have to pass the time, and you have to pass all of the input in like a giant buffer. And so who's making that buffer would be the other question, and who's updating t? Like, who is it? So I would argue that a game made only with only pure functions actually can't exist. In any meaningful way. Like, it's a fool's errand, I would say. Will you cover non-monospace fonts and font kerning? Sure. It's actually no more difficult, really, to have non-monospace fonts than it is to have monospace fonts. It's not a appreciable amount of... It doesn't really complicate the code. It's a very, very minor change between those two. I mean, basically, like, the entire difference between a monospaced and a proportional font is like, I draw a character, right? I draw the letter A at this location. Well, I now have to figure out where to draw the next character. The entire difference between kerning fonts and monospace fonts is monospace fonts, right, are like, I draw it at x plus some constant, and kerned fonts, or proportional fonts, right, are just x plus some function where I take the previous char, previous char, and this char, right? And it tells me how far to move. So it's just a single lookup table that takes the two glyphs and tells it how far to move is the entirety of the implementation for a proportional font. It is literally the dumbest thing ever. Like, you will be completely unimpressed when you see us implement this because the difference between these two is like one table lookup. It is literally replacing C with a table lookup. Functional game. The state is an argument and a new state is returned. So basically what you're saying is it constructs an entire new one. So you're saying you would do f of t and input, and you're saying that it basically produces this produces, I guess you do this, right? So you do world, time, and input, and that produces like world 1. Is that what we're basically saying? So my question then is, all right, if that happens, so this is our new model for the game, who is it that's actually, like, what are you actually doing this in, right? So now I have a loop, let's say, for, and I'm producing these worlds. How do I actually show the world to the user without a side effect? Like, where does it go? So I'm in here, I say, all right, I've got W new. I call it, I give it W old. I give it the time step. I give it the input. I get the new one, right? I then do W old equals W new. Somewhere right here, I had to display this thing. How do I display it purely functionally? Do I imagine, are we imagining that we have a functional GPU, which is some kind of a graphics card that we, you know, I don't even know. How do you display this to the screen? I guess is my question. Like how do we get something on the screen? Because the screen is like a buffer, right, that the GPU is trying to read out of, but we can't write to the buffer. Because, so I guess okay, so maybe what we try to do is it's just in a for loop. I'm trying to make this work. So it's in a for loop. At the top of the for loop, no, I don't see any way. I don't see any way to do it. How much of the code you've written so far can be ported to 3D easily? Well, actually, all the code is 3D for the most part. The only thing that we didn't do 3D is we don't prospectively correct our textures. So, like, if you wanted to use our bitmap fill to draw 3D shapes, you would get warping. So we would have to introduce a perspective divide to our bitmap fill, which is not hard to do. But everything else in the game is already 3D, right? We don't really use any 2D anything that I can think of anyway. At least in Haskell, the pure functional part is hidden away from the I/O stuff by a mathematical concept called mode. Okay, so what you're saying is you don't really want to make a purely functional game. You want to make everything below the display part be functional, maybe. And in which case, I mean, I guess I would say, well, if you're already not going to be completely functional, is there some reason why you think that the game should be completely functional? Like, is there a benefit to that? I mean, what do you gain other than wasting a heck of a lot of memory bandwidth on this? Right? I mean, it's kind of brutal. And you can't cache anything, really, because you have to rewrite everything every time. So, like, the whole 4 GB asset footprint would have to, like, live in here or something. Be pretty brutal. No more questions? I see no more questions. I think it's time to wrap it up. Manic the Nobody, if you have time to answer an off-topic question, it's been all off-topic questions tonight. What do you think of a graphic system that intentionally simulates Mode 7? I mean, Mode 7 is just the ability to, like, flatten a, you know, to tilt a planar image, right? Like, I mean, is there, like, what would be the goal of such a system? It seems like kind of a relic of a bygone era. Like when we have full 3D, why would we want to have just one thing that can be 3D like laid down, you know? Anonymal, will we be planning on implementing any networking? No, we will not be doing any networking. And Caducles, thank you for tuning in. I know it's difficult from Moscow or from the far from places far away from Seattle. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a good weekend. All right, I will wrap it up here. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you want to follow along at home with the source code, it comes with the pre-order. So if you want to pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, you can download the source and play around with it, learn from it. It's fun to tinker. We also have a Patreon page if you just want to support the video series. You can subscribe to that. We also have a forum site you can go to ask questions and get ports to Mac and Linux that community members have done. Check out an annotated episode guide that community members have done. And if you want to try and catch the stream live, we have a tweet bot that will tweet the schedule at you. I highly recommend subscribing to that or at least checking it periodically if you are someone who wants to catch the stream live, because the schedule does change up on occasion. Oftentimes it's 5 days a week, 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or Pacific Standard Time, depending on the daylight savings that's in effect. But sometimes, like I think next week, I know I have to be away for the weekend, so there'll probably be like Thursday and Friday there might not be a stream or something like this, right? So it's a good thing to keep track of, just so you know when the stream's going to be live if you're someone who likes to catch it live and you don't get caught by surprise. All right, that's about it for today. I hope everyone has a fun weekend and has fun coding this weekend. And until then, I'll see you on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.